Nicholas Sposato is the alderman for Chicago's 38th Ward. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you, Mayor Rosemary. Thanks for having me.
So there, in a social media post, I'm sure you saw too, yesterday, President Trump was threatening to deploy the National Guard and also immigration agents, I guess ICE, to Chicago. What can you tell me about what you're seeing and what your residents are seeing on the ground right now?
Yeah, well, first off, I'd like to start, Rosemary, by saying Chicago is not a hellhole. I'm sorry. I think, like my mayor says, it's the best freaking city in America. So, but I haven't seen anything other than a lot of Trump derangement syndrome protests. We know ICE is coming for good reason, to get criminals out of our city, out of our country. But as far as the National Guard, I've always believed, and I still believe that they are not coming to Chicago.
It's probably clear that you do support Donald Trump, but you have issues with the idea of the National Guard coming into Chicago, as do many other cities. What would be your concern about that?
Well, I'm probably one of the only two aldermen probably support President Trump. My issue is it's not their job. They don't know the lay of the land. Yeah. A lot of these kids are not from Chicago, not even from Illinois. You're going to put them in basically in pretty rough neighborhoods in the city, and they're going to be standing out there. I'm not sure if they're supposed to be scarecrows. I'm not sure if they're going to have M16s. Yeah. Nobody knows what their job is. So we welcome help, but the help of young 18, 19-year-old kids who are probably well-trained, but I don't believe they're trained for something like this. I think it's a recipe for disaster, and it's something that I do not support. Certainly support help, but not putting a National Guard on our streets. Just not a good look.
Well, let's talk about why you might need the help. I mean, I don't think it would be news to anyone that Chicago does have some serious crime issues. 60 people shot during the Labor Day weekend. At least 8 people were killed. What do you believe is the solution? If it's not the National Guard, what more does Chicago need? Because clearly you need something.
Well, supposedly we're trending in the right direction, which I do believe that a little. It doesn't look good when on Labor Day you see 58 people shot and 8 killed. But you can always use help. We can always get better. So we could, if he wants to send resources, and supposedly it's going to cost like $100 million to do what he was allegedly going to do, which I still think, like, once again, he's not going to do. But I'd rather just take the money and use that money to get more police officers. We have a new police superintendent last couple of years who's done an awesome job. We have an awesome new state's attorney that's doing an awesome job. So with everything chips away at this crime, and we're never going to get it down to nothing. But if we can get it to a respectable amount, that'd be great.
So you said a couple times there that you don't believe, or you didn't believe, that the president was going to do this, that he was making threats about the National Guard. He has followed through in some places, as you know, LA and DC. Why is he saying it then? What do you think is really going on here?
You never know why the president says or does a lot of things he says or does. I think a lot of it has to do with his hatred for Governor Pritzker and his hatred for Mayor Johnson. So they're playing all these games with each other, having different kind of press conferences, and I like to call them clown shows. And so that's a big problem. So they're playing a game of chicken, and who's losing out on this? The residents of the city of Chicago.
Yeah. When you see what he's done in D.C. in particular, I guess, because that's the most recent example, sending the National Guard in, what did you make of that? And whether you think it's effective, symbolic, or just, sort of trying to prove a point?
Yeah, I've been following that pretty closely, and it seems like it's working and helping. So, I don't know. That one baffles me a little bit. Even Mayor Bowser doesn't seem to be all too upset about it. So different place, Washington, D.C. and Chicago, Illinois. But I don't know exactly all the specifics, what happened or how it's working or what's going on or what they're doing. So it's kind of hard to comment on that one.
Sure. As you know, though, there are other U.S. mayors, police chiefs who have been very clear that they're against the National Guard inside cities, but just like you, do want some help to fight crime, trace guns, deal with that kind of stuff. What beyond more money, more police, what is the area you think that needs to be tackled in particular in Chicago?
Well, if you notice, Rosemary, all of those mayors that are against it are all Democratic mayors. So that all suffer from Trump derangement syndrome. When President Obama did what he did, you didn't hear a peep out of him about it. When President Biden deported 3 million people, you didn't hear a peep out of him about it. But now all of a sudden, President Trump wants to help, and they're all in an uproar about it, having protests all over the place. So I think a big help would be if we could get more like almost investigators, FBI type people that can investigate a lot of these previous crimes and who did them. I was told by a previous superintendent a few years back that anything that's going to happen, any murders, any shootings that happen in the city, there's a list of about 1,500 individuals that they know there's a 90 to 95% chance that one of those individuals is going to be part of it. So we could certainly use more investigating, more crime solving, stuff like that.
I'll just end on this. Given that you do support the president, is it frustrating or disappointing to hear him sort of trash talking your city and making these kinds of threats?
Well, it's the threats don't bother me as much. I mean, the most recent one was not a very nice one, but of course I don't like the threats. I just wish that him and the governor would sit down, and if they can't grow up and sit down and talk to each other, I'm more than willing to be a mediator and sit between the two of them and say, let's solve our problem in Chicago here. We need help. Let's get it done and stop playing games and take care of the citizens of Chicago.
Well, Alderman, as I said to you before we started the interview, Chicago, definitely my favorite U.S. city. So I'm watching this closely. Thank you so much for making the time for Canada.
Thanks, Rosemary. Sure is a great town. Pleasure being on the show.
On our American Roundtable this week, Josh Wingrove is a White House reporter with Bloomberg News, and Toluse Olorunnipa is a staff writer with The Atlantic, both of them in Washington this morning. Good morning to you, gentlemen. I want to start with that because we did just speak to an alderman in Chicago who was expecting something to happen this weekend. It didn't. Doesn't mean it won't. But it's really hard to understand what is going on here, Josh. What is the idea behind what the president is threatening or trying to do?
Trump is basically trying to use the National Guard to kind of crack down on crime, but there's a large political context here, right? He wants to sort of take aim at Democrat-run cities and criticize them for not doing enough to tamp down on crime. We've had this in Washington already here, as you mentioned. The National Guard are hanging out at subway stops. It's, just kind of doing their thing. It's a little unusual to see. Washington, though, is a unique legal authority, and so there's a lot of questions of where this goes next. Generally speaking, it would be easier for Trump to go to Republican states where the governor can formally call in the Guard and then send those troops to Democrat-run cities if he's looking for political advantage. But this is largely political. D.C., for instance, has a crime problem. It has been coming down from recent highs. It is still elevated, but it also has a budget problem that has been exacerbated by Republicans, and the Congress has not tried to reverse that. So there's a political element to all of this, and of course it's raising all kinds of questions. That tweet yesterday, sort of using meme imagery from Apocalypse Now to talk about the Department of War going into the city of Chicago, real eye-opener.
So Tolu, if the president were to do this in somewhere like New Orleans, for instance, how would that go over? Because even the gentleman I talked to in Chicago likes Donald Trump, doesn't like this idea of the National Guard walking around Chicago.
Well, we've already heard from some Democratic representatives in New Orleans saying that the National Guard will not be welcome in that city. It is a state that has a Republican governor, and so some Republican governors have been sending their National Guard troops to Washington, sort of showing their support for what Trump is doing. But this would also be an incursion on their own authority. Republican governors have the ability to send the National Guard to anywhere in their state. They're the commanders-in-chief of their own National Guard. They don't need the president to do it for them. And so this would be Trump sort of bigfooting some of these Republican governors if he were to go into any Republican states saying, I know how to solve crime better than you do, and let me take over from here. And so you could see a little bit of tension between some Republican governors and the White House if Trump decided to try to go to some Republican states. Mostly, he's been talking about going to Democrat-run states and states that have Democratic leaders as mayors. And so I would expect that to be where he focuses. But if he does talk about New Orleans, you could have a little bit of tension between the Republican governor there trying to figure out how to navigate inviting in the troops and having Trump lead the way, as opposed to him as the governor saying that I'm going to take control here and make sure that any crime in my state is under control based on what I do, not based on what the White House is doing.
Okay, Josh, you hinted at it there, the executive order on Friday that saw the president rename the Department of Defense to the Department of War. The president says that's trying to send a message of strength. Does it do anything? Does it change anything? I'm not sure it tracks with him trying to be the president that negotiates peace deals, but beyond that.
Right. He's sort of fishing for a Nobel Peace Prize. He called himself like a peacemaker president. This is a branding exercise in many ways. Trump's own allies and staff routinely sort of, boast and compliment what a great brander he is. And of course, that's been core to his political success over his career. Sure. So this is partially branding. Of course, remember the Defense Now War Secretary just came from Fox News. So, this is trying to send that kind of message. Let's remember, though, that he is withdrawing or repositioning troops away from Europe. They're generally, of course, pulling back or stopping certain aid to Ukraine. There's some reporting in the last week or so that they're de-emphasizing, sort of shifting their posture to counter China. So there is an isolationist bent that's coming with it. So it is sort of counterintuitive in some ways, but heavily branding. They've got the new signs up and everything.
Oh, Tolu, it's interesting, too, because there are places where, of course, the military is being used more. I mean, the attacks on Iran, Venezuela, cartel operations in Venezuela. Is there actual sort of substance behind this renaming in terms of the militarization of the United States?
Well, as Josh said, a lot of this is about branding. The president wants to send a message with his use of the military. He's talked about wanting to be a president of peace and getting the U.S. out of wars, but he also wants to be able to show himself as a strong man, as someone who cannot be messed with by other countries. And so he has sort of used some of these strikes and some of these military operations to try to send a message that the U.S. military is willing to go to places where it hasn't gone in the past, including in our own hemisphere, striking in the Caribbean Sea against quote unquote drug cartels. I wouldn't expect this to be the first of multiple strikes in that vein, in this effort in which he struck a boat in the Caribbean Sea. But I think he's trying to send a message that can be a deterrent against future actions by adversaries. And so we'll see if that works. But that seems to be how he's using the military so far. Let's
talk a little bit about the economy there. Obviously, anything that happens there has an impact here. The latest job numbers in the U.S., little growth, rising unemployment. What is happening there, Josh? Is this all sort of because of the tariff moves? How is the White House responding to those numbers?
I think it's a bit mixed, but it doesn't look good. Like, the reasons are mixed, but the outcome is clear. The economy is less strong than it was, and the employment market is less strong than it was. Trump has been arguing both that the economy is strong and that he deserves rate cuts. Those two things tend not to go hand in hand. Rate cuts tend to be medicine for a bad economy. Now it looks like he's going to get his rate cut potentially as soon as this month, or at least one of them, but not because things are going so great, but because the Fed thinks that the economy needs a shot in the arm. And so this could worsen as the potential tariff bite continues. Remember, companies are still sort of sorting out how to deal with these. It's not just the country-by-country tariffs, as Canada knows well. It's also the tariffs on things like steel and aluminum and all the derivative goods, hundreds and thousands of types of goods down the chain that people are trying to figure out what they owe tariffs on. And of course, a potential Supreme Court ruling, we're hearing from Secretary Bessent this morning, that could potentially, throw some of these tariffs out, force refunds. It's very up in the air right now, to say the least. But the U.S. economy is it's not as strong as it was. Trump is banking that some of the investment pledges that he's been announcing by other companies are going to help, accelerate that. But time will tell. We just don't know right now.
And Tolu, one of the things the president does with this is says that the job reports aren't real, that they're phony. He talks about how it's not important. I mean, it is important. So I just wonder how, at what point, whether he will have to sort of change course in terms of how he responds.
Yeah, we talked about branding earlier. You can't brand your way out of a poor economy. No. And he's tried to fire the top leader of the Bureau of Labor Statistics that put together some of these numbers in the past when he saw that the numbers were not looking too good. He put his own person in there and the numbers still don't look good. And so he can try to sort of talk his way out of this. But as soon as this starts to hurt the American people and their pocketbooks and in the job market, we've already seen high unemployment, especially among young people. It'll be very difficult to brand his way out of this.
Josh and Tolu, nice to see you again. Glad you're back with us for another season and appreciate your time this morning. Thanks, gentlemen. Bye-bye.
Great.